How Jim Harbaugh wrecked Sparty football. Next on this week's episode of Michigan Podcast.
But there's going to be one team that's going to play solely as a team. No man is more important than the team. No coach is more important than the team. The team, the team, the team.
Looks deep for Anthony Clark. Waits for it. Hit. Caught.
This is no time for that. In the pocket and a sack. Tim Jamison.
Brady gets terrific. Throws it. Get it. Touchdown. Knight again. Schultz just before Brazil got him. And a leaping interception by Woodson.
Arbor back to throw over the middle. Caught by Collier at the 5 on his feet. Touchdown, Michigan. On its way. It's good.
He's 5'7", 179 pounds, a junior at Michigan. But Jamie Morris packs a wallop, and he delivers for Bo Schembechler.
And here's your first play. Pressure coming. Sack. It is Glenn Steele, number 81, who fought his way through the traffic.
Option. And Robinson calls his own number, and he's going to score. Oh, an easy touchdown for Robinson and Michigan.
Win it. We're going to win the championship again because we're going to play as a team. And when we play as a team and the old season is over, you and I know it's going to be Michigan again. Michigan.
Go Blue, I'm Steve Deace. Welcome to this week's episode of Michigan Podcast. We'll have our roundtable portion with Michael Spath and Brandon Brown from Wolverine Digest and WTKA and Arbor coming up here in just a matter of moments. But first, my thoughts on Michigan 44, Michigan State 10. And I think the result of this game, the seeds for this have been sown really for the last 5 years. And I think, Michigan State football was 32-5. when Jim Harbaugh arrived in Ann Arbor, 32-5 from 2013 to 2015. But I think that first offseason, when Coach Harbaugh was getting all of the attention with the satellite camps and taking his shirt off and kicking the soccer ball and playing flag football, and ESPN is referring to D'Antonio as Mike D'Antoni and Mark D'Antoni, and they can't get his name right, even though he's had his team winning Big Ten championships and in the top 10. I really believe that rattled Michigan State's cage. And I think Michigan State realized the price of poker here has gone up. Older brother has kind of figured things out and has decided to get serious about winning again by bringing in a real football coach. And I think that very next recruiting class in 2016, you saw Michigan State sign the highest rated class under Mark D'Antonio, and it decimated the program. A lot of those players flamed out. Several of them because of sexual assault and off-the-field problems, others injuries and the like. But if you go look at the players signed in that 2016 class for Michigan State, and those are the guys that should be your juniors and seniors right now, and you see what happened to the program as a result of that class. And I think when you're a developmental program like Michigan State, heck, I think if Alabama lost that many guys in one recruiting class, it would at least, cost them another loss or two. But when you are a developmental program like Michigan State, and a darn good one, nonetheless, when you're a developmental program, you don't have the kind of a lock and reload and next man up. You need a couple years to turn guys that come in looking like 2s and 3 stars into guys who eventually leave looking like 4 and 5 stars, especially, the in-house pharmacist that Joe Bashi was consulting. You can't take a potato and make potato salad with that overnight. It takes a few, we'll go with treatments, if you know what I'm saying. All right. So I think that rattled Michigan State's cage and they panicked. And then you saw in 2016, they went 3-9. In 2017, yes, they came back and went 10-3, but they had several down to the wire wins. Offensively, they weren't very good. They ranked in the 90s in total offense that year. They got the fluke, -5 turnover win against Michigan. They had a couple of games like that. And then you saw the regression to the mean last year. Michigan State went 7-6 down the stretch. 4 out of their last 5 games, they allowed the opponent 1 offensive touchdown or less, and Michigan State lost 3 of those games. And then you saw D'Antonio rearranging the deck chairs in the Titanic, not making coaching staff changes, thinking that they can just kind of figure it out in-house. And this season now, they haven't won a game since September the 28th. The only other program in major college football that can say that is Arkansas, who's already fired its coach. And I think a lot of this is because the hiring of Jim Harbaugh made Michigan State realize that the era of Joe Bolden's steaks and then punchlines after the game was over when you drive a stake through him, that era is over. Real Michigan football is about to return. And now you're seeing the years of the recruiting that Jim Harbaugh has done. I mean, you look at the athletes Michigan put on the field against Michigan State. The punt that Khaleke Hudson blocked was not a punt block. Michigan was in a punt safe. He would just so blew up the interior of Sparty's punt unit that he blocked it totally on his own. There's just too many athletes on the field. And it was just a matter of, would Michigan ever be able to evolve to an offense that would put this kind of pressure and conflict on an opposing defense? And finally, we saw it on Saturday with the career game from Shea Patterson. And now when you're solving your problems with aggression on defense and the kind of talent that Michigan has acquired over there. And now you're going to have an offensive system that may hopefully finally unleash all of the talent on that side of the football. Well, now you're cooking with gas, and you've hit the gas and driven way past Michigan State, which is still going 10-2, driving Miss Daisy, on the shoulder, while you're going past them, and they have no clue where their program is going. It'll be a fascinating story to watch with the future of Mark D'Antoni. We have said today he plans on coming back next year. The AD said last week that he's not going anywhere. I think I speak for Michigan fans everywhere when we say we approve. Now, of course, a sizable segment of you, and I don't disagree, are going to say, doesn't matter, just beat Ohio State. Well, it does matter, but I agree with the larger sentiment that is the benchmark. And I still wouldn't pick Michigan to beat Ohio State. But I do think the team we saw on Saturday gives you a realistic shot that with a couple of breaks, +2 in turnovers, etc., they could pull it off the way the 1969 team did 50 years ago. But before you look ahead to that, you've got quite the tussle against a game Indiana team that has given Michigan fits the last few years, double and triple overtime. The last 2 times the Wolverines have gone down to Bloomington, and this team is better than any of those. And so this is the week we find out whether the offensive evolution is complete, because there should be some favorable matchups for Shea Patterson to exploit with his receivers and weapons in this game, as well as the fact that Indiana's rush defense is not that great either. So, an opportunity for Michigan to show that we have come now to the turning of the tide. The install of this offense took a hell of a lot longer than anybody had thought or hoped, but it appears, hopefully, finally, to be complete. And now Michigan is finally able, we hope, to be the team so many people thought they were going to be before the season began. And we're going to find out if that's the case with the 2 games the Wolverines have remaining. We'll talk about that and more with Michael Spath and Brandon Brown from WTKA in Ann Arbor and Wolverine Digest next. Hey, I want to introduce you to a brand new partner of ours here at Michigan Podcast, Hero Soap Company. Check these guys out. Veteran-owned soap company. Sign up for a subscription and get soap delivered right to your door each and every month. 3 different options starting at just $5 a month, all the way up to the Battalion package, or as I like to call it, the Buckeye package. 3 bars of soap each month for those Buckeye fans out there who need some extra help getting that stink off. The best part of this is Hero Soap Company donates a portion of each purchase to help veterans and active military, something all of us can unite behind, Wolverines, Buckeyes, Sparties alike. Use the promo code Michigan Podcast and get 10% off of your order, promo code Michigan Podcast, all one word, and get high quality soap without having to go to the store. Hero Soap Company. Check them out online at herosoapcompany.com. Let freedom clean. Michigan 44, Michigan State 10. Boy, a lot of angles to explore just with that headline alone, and let's do it with our roundtable from Wolverine Digest and WTKA in Ann Arbor, Michael Spath and Brandon Brown. Gentlemen, good to have you with us. And Michael, I'll begin with you, and I'm just going to start both of you off with the score. And what immediately comes to mind when I tell you Michigan 44, Michigan State 10.
Yeah, for me, it's awesomeness. I mean, we've had this conversation, and this conversation piece will never go away. But it's always about like what rivalry matters more to the Michigan fans, and is it Ohio State? Is it Notre Dame? Is it Michigan State? And as we've discussed multiple times, I mean, when you live here, when you have family, when you have friends that are Spartans, it's just so much more in your face. And at least in this media market, the biggest media personality still remains a host of a Detroit sports talk radio who's a unabashed Spartan, lover. Now he's been very critical of the program recently, but someone who has never wasted a breath taking a shot at Michigan, at Jim Harbaugh, at the Wolverine program. And so when you've had to endure this over and over again for years because of the success that Mark D'Antonio had against Brady Hoke and Rich Rodriguez, it just carries a lot of weight to beat the Spartans, and to beat them in the fashion that they did by 34 points, to take their knees out, to give them that sixth loss of the year, to spell even greater trouble for Mark D'Antonio. I mean, it was the most satisfying. We had this conversation if it was a bigger win for Michigan than Notre Dame. I think the Notre Dame game was a bigger, more important win, but there's nothing more satisfying than beating Michigan State in the capacity that Michigan did on Saturday.
Brandon, Michigan 44, Michigan State 10. Your initial thoughts?
It's about damn time. That's how I felt when I saw that, because when Jim Harbaugh was hired, I think a lot of Michigan fans, myself included, kind of thought all right, this is the savior of the program. He is superior in every way to Mark D'Antonio, and I don't know if Michigan State's going to beat Michigan again. And we all know what happened in the first time they met up when Jim Harbaugh was hired. So, and credit to Mark D'Antonio for getting his guys to always show up for that game and play a little bit above where they probably should. But now Jim Harbaugh has the edge at 3-2. And we don't know if Mark D'Antonio is going to get another shot to try to even that up. I don't think it matters. I think if he comes back next year, their team is even worse. And Michigan has a chance to be pretty good again next year. So it probably doesn't matter. And I feel like the tables have really turned and the things have really shifted back towards Michigan's favor. The entire, the whole fallout with Michigan State and Curtis Blackwell and everything that went on with that pretty much ruined Michigan State's chances to recruit in the city of Detroit. So while Michigan has pretty much had their pick of the litter when it comes to Michigan prospects, I think it's going to go even further into the Maize and Blues' favor. And it just all things feel kind of right with the world again, and that's kind of what I think everybody thought was going to happen right away when Jim Harbaugh was hired, and it didn't. And like I said, credit to Mark D'Antonio and Michigan State for the way that they always treat that game and how hard they do play against the Wolverines, but it feels normal again, and like I said, it was about time that it played out that way. It wasn't a close game. There was no weird weather. There were no funky bounces. It was just a straight dominating performance by Michigan.
Michael, when you look at the rivalry, earlier today, Mark D'Antonio said at his weekly press conference that he plans on being back next season, said that he needs to bring this full circle. I would argue that he has. That if you look at the last two seasons, Michigan's won the game 65-17 that's the combined score of the last 2 years. If you look at the two games that Mark D'Antonio won since Coach Harbaugh took over, you have one of the all-time fluke plays in the entire 150-year history of college football, 1 in a million. And then you have the deluge game, and I've never bought the argument that they only won because of the rain. Michigan played in the rain too, and that's kind of the excuse Notre Dame tried tried to make a month ago, but they won by 4 points when they were +5 in turnovers. How often are you ever +5 in turnovers against a team with a pulse? So these are kinds of fluky games where if you look at the trajectory of what Michigan has done statistically and on the scoreboard, if you look at the talent between the two programs, I mean, Michigan's got, their second string kicker out there kicking 49-yarders with 20 yards to spare. Michigan State couldn't cover any of Michigan's athletes in space. Michigan had a punt safe on at the end of the game, and Khaleke Hudson so blew up his lone blocker, he got the punt block anyway. Just everywhere you looked, Michigan had better athletes. If you look at the recruiting, trajectory, I don't see that changing anytime soon. So I kind of think the Sparty program has come full circle here, which is beat Michigan, hope to beat them every few years. It's our Super Bowl, and we're about a 6 or 7 win team, because that's kind of what it's been most of our lifetimes, Michael.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, I think that's an interesting quote to say he wants to bring this full circle, because full circle is bringing it back to where he was when he started, and where he was when he started was a program that was losing to Michigan, as you said, 3 out of every 4 years. And he's right on that precipice. He as you said, I mean, he should have lost in 2015. That would be 4 out of 5. I was talking to my brother, and I said, when you look at what Michigan State is losing, what their projection is for next year, this is a Michigan team that should win next year and should win the year after that too, when they come back to Ann Arbor in 2021. And so that would be, Michigan winning 5 out of 7 years, and that's pretty much right on par with what this rivalry always has been. And it's interesting because we did a comparison of position group by position group before the game, and if you remember, I mean, T.J. Duckett and Charles Rogers and Cedric Irvin and they had Jeff Smoker. I mean, they've had some good players, right? During our entire lives, Steve. They've always had Lorenzo White and certain players that you're like, man, like, this is a really good player. Oh, that's a really good player. What they've had is a couple of really good players throughout this history that maybe have been able to elevate their team around them. But what they have rarely had in this rivalry is the better team, the great team that has been able to keep up with Michigan consistently. And I think that's what we're starting to see again. If you talk about this Michigan State team right now and you're like, okay, what stands out to you? Well, they have a couple of great players. Kenny Willekes is a great player. And Joe Bocci before he got busted for PED use, although there's probably a whole story there whether or not he was a great player because of the PED use. But Darryl Stewart was a great player before he got hurt. And down the road, Elijah Collins looks like he's going to be a great running back for Michigan State. But you can't consistently beat a team with a lot more talent when all you've got is a handful of players, and that's all Michigan State has right now. That's all that they appear to be having in the future. And when you look at Michigan, I mean, we went down the list. Brandon for Wolverine Digest does this top 25 stock report, and I mean, you could have 15, 18 guys that could make the case for being in the top 5 right now. And that's where Michigan is, and hopefully that's at a spot that carries them to 2 more victories this season.
Brandon, your thought on the conversation Michael and I were just having, big picture about where the rivalry stands. And when you look at where Michigan State, Michigan struggled, frankly, more than it probably thought it was going to with some in-state recruiting in the last cycle, despite bringing in a top 10 class. But you would think that's because Michigan State capitalized on that. No, you had Penn State, Northwestern, Ohio State coming in and getting some of those players. Almost none of them went to Michigan State. Their highest rated in-state recruit for this coming class right now, according to 24/7 Sports, is the 17th rated player in the state of Michigan. Now you're either going to have a lame duck coach or a new coach who doesn't have, the ties to the state. You have the Curtis Blackwell situation. He helped them so much with in-state recruiting, and now that's probably decimating them with that scandal and the deposition to go on there. I don't see the talent gap here narrowing anytime soon. When you look at now, Harbaugh kind of has his groove. He seems to have found an offensive system that it can match the aggression of the defensive system and the highlighting of athletes. At least we're hoping that what we saw on Saturday was not an outlier, but a trend. We'll talk more about that in a second. But I don't see how in the next 2 to 3 years this gap narrows that much for Michigan State. Am I wrong?
I don't think so. I mean, if I'm a Michigan State fan, it's bleak at just about every turn. I mean, when you talk about, okay, what's Mark D'Antonio doing? Is he like leaving or staying? They're both bad. I feel like it's a bad situation in both directions. If he stays, it's probably worse. If he leaves, like, who do you get? Who wants to take over that program? Who's confident that they can come into Michigan State with the current setup of the Big Ten East as it is and actually compete? You mentioned the recruiting, and Michigan just seems to be pulling away there. Who they actually have coming back on next year's roster that can contribute. Michigan has a wide margin there. Michigan State is pretty experienced and senior-laden team right now, so that's going to be something that they try to deal with. And just the overall feel and how they've lost games this year. You mentioned obviously we're talking about how bad they just got beat by Michigan, but the complete crumble and meltdown against Illinois. Just the way that the offense was terrible. They haven't won a game since September. They scored less than 20 points in the month of October. The assistant coaches are nobody would take them. I mean, if Michigan cleaned house and got rid of all of its assistants, like, who's hiring those guys? It's just a bleak situation all the way around, and it doesn't look to be swinging back the other way. And you almost need like it almost feels like in a professional sports world where you just need to blow it up, just blow up the whole thing and start from scratch. And that's a crappy place to be for a Michigan State fan and for the people on that staff and within that program, because I think they know it too. I mean, they have to feel that. I mean, luckily they have two of the worst opponents, two of the worst teams in the Big Ten left on their schedule to get to 500 on the season. So, yeah, it feels like a gigantic momentum shift in this rivalry, not only this year with the 34-point win, but in the years to come. It just looks like Michigan's ascending upward and Michigan State is kind of spiraling out of control a little bit. And what happens with Mark D'Antonio is going to be a really, really big domino as to what happens with this program moving forward.
By the way, I know it's early, but if you look at schedules for next season, I think Michigan State has the toughest schedule in the Big Ten. And in the non-conference, they're going to play BYU and Miami. And if you look at who those teams have coming back next year, it is possible both of those could be preseason top 25 teams next season. And they play those two teams in the non-conference before they even get to what is an increasingly just growing deeper Big Ten conference. But let's go ahead and talk about the home team here. Brandon, I'll come back to you. We've been throwing up some B-roll of Shea Patterson while you guys have been talking. And we finally saw the Shea Patterson that frankly we thought we were going to see all this season. A career-high 384 yards in a Michigan uniform, 4 touchdown passes to 4 different receivers, completions to 9 different receivers. He had only completed 57% of his passes coming into the season, which is not good for a college quarterback. He had over 72% completions, though, against Sparty, and that was on a tie for his season high, I believe, in attempts, or maybe tied for second most attempts he's had this year. So it wasn't like he just got hot, went 9 out of 10. They were slinging it all over the yard the whole game. He had 15 completions of 15 yards or more. Now, I think we have to throw this in, and I mentioned this last week. Wisconsin, Jack Cohn had his best passing game of the year against Michigan State. Michael Penix at Indiana had his best passing game of the year against Michigan State. Brandon Peters, Illinois, had his best passing game of the year against Michigan State. So we're a long way from the old no-fly zone under Pat Narduzzi from a pass defense standpoint. But let's face it, going into this week, I think all three of us doubted that Michigan was either willing or capable, even against Michigan State's beleaguered passing defense, to do what it did offensively. And it literally just went from what the hell's going on here to a machine in one game. How did they do this, Brandon?
No idea, because I didn't think it was going to happen either. I mean, we talked about this a couple weeks ago when Michigan was getting ready to take on Maryland. I mean, granted, it was on the road, but it's Maryland. It's not like you're going into, it's not like you're going into Bryant-Denny or something like that. So, to me, it just showed that. Am I still there?
You're here. Yep. Go ahead.
Okay. Sorry, I thought I lost you. To me, it just showed that there is an evolution taking place, and this is something that we talked about wanting to see all year. Speed and space looked alive and well. The flare screens, the bubbles, a beautifully executed RPO at the end of the game, albeit against a defeated and down-and-out Michigan State team to hit Cornelius Johnson on a touchdown pass to give them 44 points. It just looked like, again, Steve, like you said, like what we thought we would see all year. And now you wonder, like, what I was talking to Mike about this on the radio. I do my predictions every week on Thursday or Friday. I don't know what to predict. Like last week, I said Hassan Haskins will carry the ball 12 times, and Michael literally, I think he made fun of me for about 3 minutes. He's like, "Oh, you're really serving up a fat meatball on this one, aren't you?" I'm going to go out on a limb there, and he carried the ball 6 times. So I don't really know what they're going to do, and that's exactly what Indiana's probably thinking, and Ohio State's thinking. Like, man, they ran for 300-plus yards against Notre Dame. Look what they did against Michigan State. Again, Michigan State's not very good in pass defense, but neither was Maryland, and they didn't try to do it. So it's just cool to see. I'm excited to see that the offense is now looking like that. Maybe, Josh Gaddis just really saw a weakness in what Michigan State is able to do. But again, I can't help but think back, like, it hasn't looked like this against any other team all year, and not every team that they played has a great pass defense. So yeah, it's a little bit of a head scratcher. I don't really know why it looked like that or how the switch flipped so quickly, but I'm glad it did because it was fun to watch. And this is the Shea Patterson that I thought we would see when Josh Gaddis was hired.
So, Michael, let's try to make some sense out of this. And I know you love the argument about they've been holding things back to not show anything. I know that's one of your favorites, okay? But, we heard all these glowing reports you did from your insiders through practice. And you even had a story for us at Wolverine Digest, a month into the season after the Wisconsin loss, where your people are like, they can't figure out why we're not seeing in games what we're seeing in practice. How much of this is, it's not so much spontaneous combustion as they weren't holding things back to need a missed field goal to beat Army. All right, they weren't holding things back to fall down 21-0 to Penn State. But it did take some time, both with the oblique with Shea, and then also with getting those receivers that were injured like Nico and DPJ most of the preseason, getting all those guys on the same page, getting confidence. And then I wonder if they actually started to click several weeks ago, but they did decide with how bad Maryland was and then a bye. I wonder now if that is where they decided, for right now, we are going to hold back what we can do right now because there's no point, and we've got 3 big ones coming up here at the end. Why show our hand right now? I do wonder if that's the juncture where they did start holding some stuff back because I really don't believe you just wave a magic wand and hit spontaneous combustion on a football field.
Well, I'll throw another part of it into it, and I think a lot of it was Josh Gaddis learning what he could do with this offense, learning his personnel, and his personnel learning, Josh Gaddis, the comfortability factor. One of the things that I was told is that, they would, part of the, we tried in practice, we weren't succeeding in practice type of thing. And so some of the stuff that he thought was going to work and be successful with, they weren't calling in games because they weren't executing in practice. And so, hey, we're not going to throw these bubble screens because Shea's inaccurate. And we saw that in some of the games earlier in the year where he would throw to a wide receiver, but he would throw, even if you're throwing to a guy 6 inches behind him, but you're not hitting him in stride, he's got to catch that ball. And by the time he catches that ball, everything is thrown off. And now you're not getting upfield, and now your guys are having to hold the block a little bit longer. And those plays were getting blown up. And they just started to figure out, like, okay, what is Ronnie Bell? Like, what is Ronnie Bell? This chemistry that he has with Shea Patterson is off the charts, where we can allow Shea to get outside the pocket and know that Ronnie's going to find some soft spots in the zone. And I think a lot of it was them figuring out, what they did well. And then the Penn State game was a little bit of a revelation that, honestly, I don't know if they're up 21-14 at the half or tied in that half. I don't know if they figure out some of those things because what they were doing was not really throwing the ball to their wide receivers in space. And then the second half, it was kind of like, hey, nothing else is working. Let's just give this a try and see if maybe it doesn't work on State Street, but maybe it'll work on Main Street. And it did. And so that gave them some confidence. I mean, Devin Gardner, who joins me from Monday Morning Quarterback all the time, talks about if you don't have confidence that your guys can run things in practice, you don't call it in games. And if you do call it in games because you just want to see, and the first time they do it, they don't execute, you don't call it again. And I think a lot of that is what was happening early in the season, where maybe they had a plan, but they weren't seeing it in front of their eyes, and so they were just abandoning stuff. And as it took the season to go on and more become comfortable and trust their guys a little more, they started calling more of their entire playbook. Now that they were hiding or holding things back, just because they started to have more confidence that their guys could execute it.
And I want to, one of the things I think Coach Harbaugh has done consistently well here is identifying talent. And most of the time when he has been on somebody that in every fan base says trust the coaches, but most of the time you can't. Most of the time you don't win. At least at the level Michigan wants to win at, with that as a recruiting strategy. But most of the time that he has gone head-to-head against the services, Michael, he has been proven to be right. And if you even look at this 2018 class, the one that was ranked right around like 22nd or something in the country, and really fell off at the end with Michigan's disappointing finish to the season. But if you look at that class, and there's a couple of guys in there that were, huge recruits that anybody would have taken. Jalen Mayfield is already starting. He's one of those guys. Aiden Hutchinson, of course, is one of those guys. But you have Cam McGrone's another. But Ronnie Bell, Hassan Haskins. I mean, you used to work over at the Wolverine. You know what message board communities are like, Michael. I mean, you take those kinds of guys at Michigan, and people are thinking we just don't. The coaches don't care about winning anymore. And those guys have helped reinvent this entire football season. And every one of the names I just mentioned, all these guys are going to be back next season as well.
Yeah, I think the 2018 class is going to be a really interesting one to keep an eye on. As you mentioned, those two guys, Jalen Mayfield and Ronnie Bell. But let me read some of the other names. Aiden Hutchinson, who is a linchpin in that defensive line, and looks like he's a future captain, and is probably going to have a career that we're talking about for a very long time. Right up next to him, Cam McGrone, who is already off to have great success. Ryan Hayes, who looks like the starting left tackle next year. Now there's a lot of, Vincent Gray is on this list, who's probably the starting cornerback for the Wolverines next year. Michael Baird is probably the starting Viper for the Wolverines. Hassan Haskins may end up being a guy who runs for 1,000 yards a couple of times if he becomes the number one running back. Jake Moody. I mean, yeah, there's a couple of guys that there's a lot to be seen still. Sammy Faustin, Ben Van Sumeren, the Green brothers. If Joe Milton becomes a star too, then this class is going to go down as one of the better classes that Michigan's ever had. And that certainly wasn't, how people felt about it when they signed that group in 2018. I mean, according to some of the records, they didn't even have a top 100 player, per 24/7 Sports. So, yeah, it's pretty incredible to see what they've done. And I think one of the things that I always bristle at is, look, we use a lot of sports cliches in our business, and a lot of fans use sports cliches. But when I've still heard people say, well, they don't know how to develop players. And I just laugh, because the one thing that this group does do consistently is develop players.
There's no doubt about that.
They have not had great success with their quarterbacks. Shea Patterson has a chance to rewrite that this year, these last couple of games. And they have had some really clunker ball games where they just had the wrong game plan and they didn't execute. But they develop players, and they've been really good on the recruiting trail. And I don't think those are 2 points you can argue with. No, I mean, I think since the day he arrived, he has been great at identifying talent, and he has been great at developing talent. And that's with several iterations of a coaching staff in these 5 years. I think the number one thing that's held this whole thing back is the program establishing, for lack of a better description, franchise quarterback, but also their game day coaching and some of the approaches that allows an Iowa in 2016 who shouldn't be on the same field as you to hang around and beat you at the end, that has Shea Patterson turning his back to the line of scrimmage and running play action passes with 7-step drops when you're down by 30 at Ohio State last year, that kind of stuff. That has been what has held them back. And to Jimmy's credit, Josh Gaddis was brought here to address that final objection. And now we're hoping we're beginning to see that the worm is turning. So this to me, gentlemen, is the final question. And I think it's the whole game against Indiana Saturday. I don't believe it'll be a trap. When Admiral Akbar is out there chanting, on the bridge of the Millennium Falcon for 9 months, it's a trap. It's a trap. Everybody knows it's a trap. The whole team knows it's a trap. Indiana has earned Michigan's respect. The last 2 times we've gone down there, it's been triple and double
overtime. So Indiana has earned Michigan's respect and attention. Now, it is an emotional letdown spot. You're just not going to be emotionally as juiced up for sleepy Bloomington as you were for your in-state rival and your biggest rival on deck. All right, so to me, this game comes down to the execution of the offense. And can they, and the weather looks like it's going to be good, even better than it was Saturday in Arbor, was that an outlier because of how bad Sparty's defense is, or was that the turning of the tide where now, if you're Indiana and you're Ohio State, you have no idea on a given down and distance what Michigan's going to do offensively because they can execute. This is if we're going to continue the Star Wars references here now, the fully armed and operational battle station. I think the whole Indiana game, Brandon, comes down to that because I do think this is a good Indiana team. It's improved, but it also athletically isn't where Michigan's at. It cannot defend Michigan's athletes in space, but do you think Michigan is capable now of being able to consistently get them the ball in those positions? What's your answer to that?
Yeah, you missed me a little bit with the Star Wars reference. I'm not really sure what that means, but I don't think.
Wow, holy dude code violation. But continue. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I don't think it's a trap. I think they've been well aware for several reasons. A couple, one being that Indiana's taken them to the brink a couple of times in Bloomington, and another reason is because they're pretty damn good this year. I mean, you put them on film, they do some good things, and Jim Harbaugh even mentioned, I think he was saying it without saying it. He's like, this team is not a crummy Indiana team that we're used to seeing. He kind of tiptoed around that, saying they look good, physically they've got some dudes and they've got some players at a couple different position groups. So I don't think they're going to be surprised. I don't think they're going to come in sleepy. I don't think they're going to be caught off guard. I don't think that's going to be an issue at all. Now, the other question, whether or not they can do this again, do what they did to Michigan State, to Indiana, is really the million-dollar question. And I think they can. I think because, look, what they did against Michigan State was not, difficult. It wasn't a hard game plan. Putting three wide receivers out to a side and throwing it to one of them while the other two block is that's football 101.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's high school and JV teams doing stuff like that. That's an easy play. It's an easy throw for the quarterback, an easy catch for the receiver, and pretty easy blocking for the receivers because you only have to hold a block for about a second to get, 8, 10, 12, 30 yards if you can spring it just right. I think they should be able to do those things. And, Steve, the point that you made about Indiana's athletes, as good as they're playing this year and as good as they have looked, they don't have the type of players that Michigan does. And I said exactly that on the radio today. They're like Michigan State. They don't recruit on the same level. They don't have the size-speed combination that Michigan does at most of their position groups. So I think they should be able to do it. Now, going on the road is different than playing at home, but again, it's Indiana. It's not Penn State at night. It's not the Shoe. It's not Camp Randall. It's Indiana, and I'm not trying to take a shot at them, but it's not the same. They're not on the same level, and I don't think you're going to get that. So I really hope we do see the same type of attack. But, hey, if Michigan wants to kick it back and run for 315 yards against them like they did against Notre Dame, I'm cool with that too. And now they do have a couple of games on film where they've done both of those things. And, I mean, to Josh Gaddis' credit, he's got some things working in his favor now because I really do think Indiana's probably like, man, what are we going to see? Is this Charbonnet kid going to run it 25 times? What about Haskins? Or maybe Patterson's going to throw it 35 times again. What are they going to do? And they've done both of those things at a high level in at least a couple of games now. So, yeah, it's kind of exciting, and I'm really anxious to see it on Saturday to see what it is that they try to exploit and what their approach is on offense.
Michael, you get the last word.
I'm really intrigued. I'm really intrigued by this football team going into these final two games. I think that, as Brandon was talking about, they have the ability to run the football. They now appear to have the ability to throw the football. They have a defense, that might have a hiccup here or there within the scope of a game, but for the most part has been really good at stopping the run and rattling quarterbacks and wearing them down as the game goes along. One of Brandon's roundtable questions this week is whether or not Indiana puts that traditional scare into U of M that it has in the past. And I'll tell you what, the way that Michigan's playing right now, I don't think so. I don't think, even as good as Indiana has performed this year, 7-3, one of their best 10-game segments of all time, I just don't think that they're going to compete with where this U of M team is right now. And so that excites me. And then we're going to be, if everything goes according to plan, we're going to be in a similar spot as we were last year, as we were in 2016, even as we were in 2015, where the entire fan base is holding out hope that this year's game against Ohio State is going to be different than the ones that we've seen the last few years. And I know that's a subject for another day. And I got to say, I still don't think there's any chance that they beat Ohio State. But I will have a lot more hope than I did 4 weeks ago, 6 weeks ago, certainly. And that's a good place to be in as a Michigan fan, is just to have a belief in your team once again.
Very well said, both of you. Great job. Thanks for joining us again this week here on Michigan Podcast, Brandon Brown and Michael Spath. Take care. Go Blue, gentlemen, and we'll be seeing you.
Okay, thanks so much.
Michigan Podcast brought to you by Wolverine Digest, now part of Sports Illustrated. That's right, the SI.com network. That's myself, Steve Deace, Michael Spath, and Brandon Brown, bringing you tons of content each and every day at WolverineDigest.com, and it's all free. Analysis, video, commentary, breakdowns, everything you need to be an informed Michigan fan. You're going to get it every single day at WolverineDigest.com. And keep in mind, we don't require access to the program in order for us to generate content. So we give you unvarnished, unfiltered analysis. Yes, we're Michigan fans. We want Michigan to do well, but we don't see it any other way other than calling balls and strikes, and that includes the home team too. Go to WolverineDigest.com now. This week's Twitter poll results, we asked you, what do you think Michigan's final football record will be? Overwhelming main answer, 65%, a super majority of you believe the Wolverines go 9-3, which means you think Michigan's going to split these two games down the stretch. About a little less than a third of you, 30%, say 10-2, so that means about 30% of you think Michigan's going to beat Ohio State. 5% of you believe Michigan loses these final two games to finish 8-4. And that brings us to our question of the week. Why in the world did you say in the first quarter Brian Lewerke was outplaying Shea Patterson? More than 100 people. And I'm only slightly exaggerating. I have had more than 100 people show up in my Michigan Podcast Twitter feed. This tweet didn't age well. I mean, that's a ridiculous take. One guy sent me a note. You know, tweets like this have really opened my eyes to what you're really about. Really? Okay, first of all, it was in-game commentary. Brian Lewerke outplayed Shea Patterson in the first quarter. He outplayed him statistically. His team was ahead on the scoreboard. He had thrown a touchdown pass. Shea was like 3 of his first 8 passes with a sack. I even had a guy who's a coach tell me, you shouldn't give any commentary about until the game is over. Really, coach? So when your quarterback sucks in the first quarter, you're like, I'm just not going to say anything until the game is over, and then we'll just see. Really? And yes, Brian Lewerke actually had outplayed Shea Patterson this year until Saturday. He ranked nine spots higher on the QBR than Shea Patterson. He was 50th, Shea Patterson 59th. Now, Patterson so badly outplayed him on Saturday that Shea rose 16 spots from 59th to 43rd in the nation in QBR and is now 7 spots ahead of Brian Lewerke, who remains 50th. But I guess I'm just like, the amount of you that got butthurt over this, there are still people tweeting me about this at Michigan Podcast. And I guess all I can say is thank you for the clicks. I guess it's in-game commentary, folks. I don't understand why so many of you got worked up about this. And on second thought, don't tell me. I don't want to know. All right. So I have no control over how well the team plays. I simply react to how well they are playing. If you did not like the fact that Brian Lewerke was better in the first quarter than Shea Patterson, okay, I'm not Shea Patterson. I don't play quarterback. I had zilch to do with his performance in the first quarter, although more than 100 of you seem to believe otherwise. Okay? I just take the W. Take the W. That's going to do it for this week's edition of Michigan Podcast. Thank you for watching and listening, as the case may be. And as the case may be, if you could give us a like, subscribe, 5-star review, whether it's iTunes or Stitcher, Google Play, or here at YouTube. Whichever the case may be, the more of those that we get, the more of those we find like you. More Michigan fans who can be incredulous that I am pointing out when the team is not playing well on Twitter in real time that it's not playing well. Heaven forbid. Yes, we would like even more of you because we're here for that. Want to thank our friends over at Detroit Sports Podcast for helping us to get the word out about what we do here at Michigan Podcast every week as well. Thanks to all of you for logging on. Hopefully next week we're talking about Michigan being 9-2 heading into the game against Ohio State. Until then, go Blue.